what's going on to all my WandaVision and MCU fans out there, and welcome back to my channel, Movie Files. Elliot back again with my weekly recap, breakdown, and review of the latest episode of Disney Plus WandaVision. We're talking episode 8, which was titled Previously On, and I'm going to just say it now, I think this is my favorite episode of the season so far. I'm going to get into my reasons why in this spoiler review, but we have a lot to break down. But before we do so, as you all can see on the screen now, make sure you all are following me on all my other social media accounts, which you can find those links in the description below. If you are new to the channel, welcome to the community. Consider subscribing to the channel, and while you all are at it, make sure you hit that notification bell. That way you can get the alert when I drop new content. It would mean a lot to me if you all can like and share this review. It helps out the channel a lot, but also appreciate all the support. And in the comment section, if you're watching this on the live premiere, welcome. Make sure you all are in the chat. I watch these videos with you, so I'll interact with you. But if you're watching this on the replay, leave your thoughts, your theories, your pros and your cons about this episode, but also what do you expect to see in the finale, and also how does this play into the recent announcement of Spider-Man No Way Home, obviously Doctor Strange 2, so on and so forth. Let's have a great discussion about this episode and the future of Wanda and Vision in the comments below. So as I do every single week, just a quick little plug, every single Saturday here at Movie Files at 3 p.m. Central Time, myself and my amazing co-host, we host a live WandaVision recap, breakdown, discussion, and we also dive into the latest MCU news, and we also bring along some amazing guests. And I want to announce this week's guest, which as you all can see on the screen now is Soups, as well as heavy spoilers. We're going to dive deep into this episode with my amazing co-host and the amazing guests that I have on tomorrow. It's going to be such a great time. I hope you all can tune in again. It's 3 p.m. Central Time here at Movie Files. Myself, Amanda, Chris, Paul, Matthew will be breaking down this episode. It's going to be such a great time, and I hope to see you all there tomorrow. But as I digress, let's get into why I think this is my favorite episode of WandaVision, and maybe one of the better origin stories of the MCU, as we get two origin stories essentially in this episode, but also we get some context behind Wanda, but also Vision, their love for one another, but also the grieving process that Wanda has gone through in her life. This episode was fantastic through and through. Let's get things started with this recap. As I predicted last week in our live discussion episode, before we get episode 8 and 9, which I do think, as far as predictions, episode 8 will be a flashback episode, not only from Agatha Harkness and maybe the Salem trials and how she got to Westview, but I also think it's going to be a flashback for Wanda. I think we're going to see Wanda getting Vision from that S.W.O.R.D facility and not get the perspective of a camera, which in the camera it looked like she's doing villainous things, but I think it's going to be like, my husband is being experimented on. He doesn't want to be a weapon. I have to save him. Explains the hex. I have to protect him. Let's get this hex to surround us. Like, this week's episode was going to be a purely flashback driven episode. We rarely get any of the newer stuff that's going on in the timeline. We get, the Hayward stuff, which we'll talk about the post-credit scene. We get the stuff, obviously, with Wanda and Agatha in the basement and obviously on the streets and all that stuff of the reveal of the Scarlet Witch. But this was primarily a flashback episode, giving us the origins of Agatha, but also the origins of Wanda becoming the Scarlet Witch. So as we see, this flashback opens up in 1693, where we see Agatha at the stake. And again, what I love about the MCU is they take some of the stuff from the comics that kind of, they remix it a little bit and give it to us in the form of their MCU. We see that she's on the stake. We see that she's betrayed her coven. She's been practicing dark magic. And we also see that at this point, Agatha, she's an extremely powerful witch. Now, as far as like where she harnesses this power, there's the Mephistos of the world, there's the Nightmares of the world, there's the Dormammus of the world, and Doctor Strange and all that stuff, the Ancient One. We'll get some more of that hopefully in the future. But we see that she is taking the powers from her coven, and she even takes the powers from her Queen Witch, or as they call it, Mother Witch. Just after watching this episode, for all my horror fans out there, was it me or did you all want to watch Suspiria after watching this? But as I digress, we see she takes the powers from her Mother Witch. I don't know if you all noticed the detail. She had a crown over her head, which shows her powers, which goes into the Scarlet Witch's powers a little bit later. But I thought that origin stories of sorts of Agatha, her becoming what we see her as in the show, and obviously learning more about that character, which I'm just going to say it now. Catherine Hahn as Agatha, please, Marvel, keep her along, keep her going for a long time. I hope she doesn't kill her off next week. I want to see more of Agatha Harkness, and I want to see more of Catherine Hahn, because she was just so incredible in this episode, as was Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda. We'll get into her performance, but I love that kind of opening of the episode. Cut to getting back into our timeline. We see Wanda, we see Agatha in their basement, or I should say in Agatha's basement, the bewitched basement, as she mentions, but really good moment. This goes back to Agatha Harkness just being a really good villain, anti-villain. Again, I talked about the character breakdown weeks ago. She's somewhat of a mentor of Wanda in the comics, and I wouldn't be surprised if they somehow play that into this show and into future interactions between Wanda and Agatha if she doesn't kill her off next week. But we see Agatha, Catherine Hahn, hamming up in this episode, poking fun of Wanda's accent coming in and out as she asks her where her kids are. But also we notice that Wanda isn't able to use her magical abilities in the basement due to, as we see Agatha talking about, there's a protection spell that is activated in the basement. And she also points out the fact that Agatha says to Wanda, you don't even know the basic fundamentals of using your abilities, which I think speaks into my theory a little bit later in regards to Doctor Strange might have to take on a new student to learn how to use this chaos magic, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But cut to Agatha going into the Pietro situation, or as she calls it, the Fietro situation, as she explains that she used him for his eyes and his ears, which still can allude to Evan Peters being a Quicksilver from some other multiverse and being an X-Men. I hope that's the case. I really hope that they didn't just bring in Evan Peters because he obviously played Quicksilver and then they just used him. He was part of the town somehow, some way. I really do hope that Pietro is revealed to be an X-Men, which will open the door to Magneto, which would open the door to Professor X, and we'll talk about that at the end here. But she mentions that she was able to put a possession spell on Pietro and again use his eyes and ears for the information to gather about Wanda, which would explain the Halloween episode when we saw Pietro asking her, how'd you do this? Where'd you get the kids from? It makes a lot of sense now. As we see, she even takes another dig at Wanda and says, I couldn't get your real brother because he was on another continent, but also he has a bunch of holes in his body. Again, Agatha Harkness, I'll just say it now, she's one of my favorite villains of the MCU. Not my favorite, she's in that top tier. I might be speaking blasphemy right now, but I think she's a top tier villain just based on last week's reveal and the stuff that she got in this episode. Hopefully we'll see her in next episode and then years ahead. I thought Agatha and Catherine Hahn as Agatha Harkness was just so incredible in this episode and this entire season. But as I go back to the recap again, she mentions that his body has holes in it, and she took advantage of Wanda being in this vulnerable state, which we know Wanda's powers are very heavily influenced by her mindset, by her emotions. So going into Agatha being impressed by her powers that she displayed in creating Westview, she wants the answers. She wants to know how she was able to harness all of these abilities. As she takes a piece of her hair, puts on a little spell, opens the door, and here, as she says, this is where we get our rerun, which I know this episode, for some people, I loved it. And like I said, I'll get into my reasons why, but I know for some people, they probably don't like the fact that we didn't move forward the story. I love that we got the origins of not only Agatha, but as we go into these reruns of Wanda's loneliness and her emotions, this is what makes this my favorite episode of the entire series. And some of my favorite MCU content to date, if I'm being honest. Cut to Wanda and her parents. Let me know in the comments, especially those that are watching this live. Was it me, or for a split second, when Wanda's dad walked into the door, I thought that was Michael Fassbender for like literally a half a second. Obviously, it wasn't him, but which gives me into my next reason. As you all can see on the screen now, I wouldn't be surprised if the MCU introduces Magda, which as you all can see on the screen now, you could press pause now, you can read the origins, but I think that Wanda's parents aren't really her parents. I mentioned it many weeks ago. I really didn't dive into it too much, but I think that the MCU might bring in the Magda into issue as in regards to once she finds out her husband kind of becomes Magneto, she hides the kids, she no longer sees her kids. I think that Wanda's and Pietro's parents aren't really their blood relatives. They raised them, they took care of them, they were given these kids because their real parents went off elsewhere. Again, wild theory, but let me know your thoughts on that in the comments. But as I go back to it, we get the origins of why we get the sitcom, how Wanda was raised, which again touches into why I think this is my favorite episode and one of my favorite origin stories for Wanda and one of my favorite origin stories at MCU. Just think about us as real people in the real world, separating ourselves from the art in regards to MCU. How many times, and I can just speak to it, whenever I'm down and out and I'm having a tough day, I think about past trauma. I resort to things that make me happy, which is TV shows, movies that get me back in the mood, and that is that human emotion that I can connect to these super, fictitious characters. And Wanda, she did the same thing. When she, we learned in this episode that they watched these sitcoms. Her dad used to sell, these old sitcoms and all this stuff, but it was also a way for Pietro and her, and Wanda to learn English. So there's some obviously some great connections there, but also it was their way of feeling comfort. It was their way from separating herself from reality, which, and what was going on during that time was, there was a bunch of stuff going on in Sokovia. There was a bunch of war in their family. This was their family time. This was their time to embrace each other, have a good time, watch the Dick Van Dyke Show, watching Malcolm in the Middle. So I love that human emotion that I can relate to with these characters that are made up characters, but this is why I love comics. This is why I love characters like Wanda as well as the MCU. So we cut to, again, seeing Wanda's love for Dick Van Dyke. And then we get the moment, which was emotional, very kind of caught me off guard. We see the explosion from what Wanda and Pietro described in Age of Ultron, that they were 10 years old. They had to sit in front of Stark Industries' bomb, which ties into the commercial from, episode 2, I believe, or episode 1 with the poster, the Stark 2000, I think it was called. But this just speaks to the genius of the MCU. And they could just continue to do this in regards to why it's so amazing that we're getting these TV shows to explore things from previous movies in the MCU. I'm a fan of Age of Ultron. It's not my favorite. It's my least favorite Avengers movie out of the 4 Avengers movies that we've gotten, but it even adds more context to that scene when Wanda and Pietro are describing to the Avengers what it was like for them to see Tony Stark's industry, and you understand that hatred towards Tony Stark. It just speaks to the genius of this MCU that Kevin Feige and the wonderful people have created. But as I digress, get a big moment here. We see that as the bomb is in front of Pietro and Wanda, it was Agatha all along in regards to the villain. We learn in this scene that Wanda has had witch abilities all along. She's been a mutant of sorts, and with the Mind Stone activating her mutant gene, which might explain how the X-Men get into the MCU, which I'm not a fan of that theory of like all of a sudden now they have their abilities and all of a sudden Professor X and Magneto are now being created in the MCU. I really do hope that they've already have been around for a long time and now they're starting to come into the MCU. Again, that might have been in the Eternals film that we would have gotten last year, but as I digress, that is such a big moment that Wanda has always had these abilities inside of her, which we'll talk about who her real identity is. Cut to us going to Hydra and seeing her volunteering into this experiment. As we know from Age of Ultron, we get that direct contact, the scene that we've seen in the trailer, and we all been making theories, is Wanda recreating the Mind Stone, but no, we see that she's interacting with the Mind Stone. One of my favorite scenes, the favorite of this episode, we see her look at the Mind Stone, and in this vision of sorts, if you want to call it that, she sees the Scarlet Witch. She sees a foreshadowing of what she's going to become, which it was a quick, half of a second. That image of her becoming becoming the Scarlet Witch was so visually stunning, and I can't wait to see Elizabeth Olsen embracing the Wanda, or actually calling her Wanda Witch, embracing the Scarlet Witch is going to be so incredible when that moment happens. But she sees this happen. We see Agatha starting to add the pieces to the puzzle together, but she needs some more context of where, again, she's harnessing this energy from, as we cut to probably my favorite scene of this episode, probably my favorite scene of this entire series, and one of my favorite scenes of recent memory of the MCU. We go to the Avengers compound and we see Wanda and Vision after the events of Age of Ultron. We see kind of their love becoming something that they've kind of embraced in one another. We see Wanda watching Malcolm in the Middle as she's describing the kind of the comedy of the show, and Vision again just being born just a couple weeks ago in that particular flashback. We see their relationship kind of festering, as it explains how awesome of a character Vision is, how awesome Paul Bettany is as an actor, as they're exploring these characters on television and talking about how it kind of relates to them, but also the conversation about grief, which was so great in regards to Vision's response to love kind of becoming something from grief. I thought that scene was incredible. I thought that the acting between those two, again, Paul Bettany is so great, how he can kind of revert back to him being the older Vision, being just born in the MCU, and obviously seeing him in this show. That scene was just so incredible. Let me know what you all thought about that moment. I thought it was just so well acted. It was, again, just talking about grief. Again, these super-powered characters, how they can emotionally have that human connection that I relate to in these characters was just so great. Cut to Wanda going into another flashback, and this is what I mentioned many weeks ago, that thing that we saw Hayward showing Monica and wooing Darcy was all altered as we get that reveal. We see that she goes to the S.W.O.R.D headquarters. We see that she goes to Vision's body, but also in the meantime, I don't know if you all saw the parallels between Monica when she's, being not reintroduced, but when she goes back to S.W.O.R.D and seeing the interaction between her and Director Hayward versus juxtaposed to how Wanda's introduced to him, how he's talking about Vision as a piece of equipment of $3 billion worth of vibranium. He says that we're going to bring him back online. All the words that he used triggered Wanda because, again, to Wanda, this isn't a computer. This isn't an android. This is someone I love. This is someone I was connected to. I lost my brother, my parents, and now I lost him. So I love, again, Hayward isn't your traditional villain in my sense. I just look at the perspective of him being this kind of Tony Stark 2.0, if you want to call it that, from Age of Ultron. Vision's a weapon. We had Thanos 5 years ago. We need to protect the Earth for another Thanos type of event. So I kind of, if that is the big moment of Hayward, that he isn't, Ultron in a human form, or if he is, we'll see how they play that out. It's all about execution, right? But I think that, again, just hearing the way Hayward was describing Vision, which, by the way, that scene of seeing them like pulling apart Vision, straight out of the comics, by the way, from Vision's Quest, which is a great comic book run. But as I digress, we see them ripping Vision apart. We see Wanda gets upset. She breaks the glass, which was the true footage, but she doesn't take the body. Hayward altered the footage. As we see, she goes down to Vision's body. She touches his head, and it's so crazy. I literally just watched, I randomly watched this movie because it's my favorite movie in the MCU. I literally just watched Infinity War last night, and we get that great callback of when at the beginning of, first 10 minutes or 15 minutes of Infinity War, where we see Wanda and Vision, and she touches his head, and he asks her, "What do you feel?" And she says, "I only feel you." What a great callback in this episode, because as she puts her hand on Vision's head, she can't feel anything. The emotions in this episode, such a great moment. We see that she doesn't take the body. She leaves. She goes to her car. We see that there's an envelope in her car, which we'll talk about the envelope here in a bit. We see that she arrives to Westview. We see all the people in town. We see Mrs. Hart. We see Herb. I don't know if you all noticed, though. I don't know if this is any significance. There were no kids running around in town. Again, it's all for the kids. What's this issue with the kids being in Westview, not being in Westview? Let me know your thoughts on that. We see the delivery man, the mailman. Is it Mephisto of sorts? He's just a delivery guy, which I love that call there. But then we see Wanda. She arrives to her destination. There's an empty lot. She opens up the letter, and as it says on there, "To grow old, V," as showing that Vision was going to buy her and Wanda. We're going to have a family there. We're going to grow old together. Very emotional moment. This is where we see, again, the emotions of that moment, and Wanda being so, her powers being invoked by her emotions. She creates the house. In doing that, she creates the hex. She creates Westview going into the hex. She creates Vision in creating this kind of hex. Again, this is a very powerful moment, showing you the Scarlet Witch has arrived as she's recreating her version of Vision, which explains why he could not lead the hex, because he was created in the hex, which goes into my theory that we'll talk about here in a little bit as we see them recreating Vision in the beginning of episode 1 of WandaVision. As we cut to Agatha again, Catherine Hahn hamming it up, clapping in the applause in the audience. We hear that she has Billy and Tommy. She has them choking again. This episode, this is getting dark. This is what I love about the MCU, embracing the darkness, which makes me so, I'm digressing right now. When Scott Derrickson said that he wanted Doctor Strange 2 to be a horror film, and Kevin Feige said, no, it's not going to be a horror film. I don't know. It seems to me that they're leading into the horror. The beginning of this episode, feeling so dark and seeing those witches die, seeing, Pietro's dead body, seeing Vision's dead body in this show. The MCU's getting dark, and I'm loving it. As we finish up the episode, we see Agatha in her full garment, her full outfit. She tells Wanda, "You're supposed to be a myth. You're supposed to be, you're capable of creating simultaneously creation." As she tells her, "You're using chaos magic," which I believe that's not the first time we've heard chaos magic in the MCU. I think they said that in Doctor Strange, as the Ancient One was kind of telling, Doctor Strange about the abilities and learning about magic and all that. But she says you've been using chaos magic, making you the Scarlet Witch, which I love that moment because in the MCU, we rarely hear our heroes be named as their comic book counterparts. We never really hear, them say, certain characters. So I love that she gets the name of Scarlet Witch. We get the name drop. We think it's the end of the episode, 38 minutes, but we get another post-credit scene, which we see them, an agent telling director Hayward they're ready for the launch. We see that Hayward is using the energy from the source in direct contact of Wanda, which was the missile that she brought into or from the Hex into the real world. As we see the camera pans to Hayward bringing back the real Vision, and this is a great comic book moment. Again, if you all have read Vision's Quest, it is the White Vision, which, long story short, in the comics, that version of Vision, he doesn't have the same emotions, he doesn't have the same personality, he's just a machine, which may be a great way, I've been saying it for weeks, to bring in Ultron. I think Ultron is somehow, some way in this new form. Again, we know Vision was created by Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, also Ultron, as well as, Thor, energized and brought all to life. But I think Ultron will be making his way back into this show, as I've been saying for many, many weeks. So the question's still left on the board. Again, I thought this was a fantastic episode. We get the origins of Agatha. We get the origins of the Scarlet Witch. We learn that she's had the power since the very beginning, which could allude to X-Men, Pietro, her brother having mutant abilities. Again, we'll see how they play the whole, my theory about Magneto and his wife dropping off the kids, or I should say his wife giving the kids as orphans because she doesn't want them, obviously in the comics to be that their father is Magneto, all this stuff and other. We'll see how that plays out. But we have one episode left. We still don't know if Ralph is still out there. We don't know. It's so funny when Paul Bettany mentioned a couple weeks ago that he's wanted to work with an actor since he was a little boy. Is that actor himself? Does he want to, have a scene where we have the WandaVision in regards to Westview Vision versus the White Vision and see who wins that battle? Is she going to be able to use his memory, his conscience, and put it in that body in regards to, again, going back to Vision's Quest, Hank Pym was able to recreate Vision of a sorts, but he really didn't come back to himself. And we know that Hank Pym's in the MCU. We know Shuri's in the MCU, so they could somehow maneuver the Hex version of Vision, use his memories and put it into this White Vision, or again, he might have to destroy him, and that might explain we get no more Vision in MCU. But I want more Paul Bettany. I hope that they bring him back some way, somehow. I hope that they explain that Pietro is an X-Men brought in from an alternate universe by, Agatha, X-Men, mutants, see how they handle all that. Again, we still got to remember, Monica Rambeau's engineer is still out there. And of course, we want to know the rumors that everyone has kind of speculated. Is Mephisto wanting to harness this chaos magic? Is it Nightmare? Or is it going to be any one of those two characters making their way into the show, setting up Doctor Strange 2? Which brings me to my last point. Vision, or I should say Wanda, as the Scarlet Witch, she's going to need to know how to harness her powers, as Agatha pointed out. She doesn't even know the fundamentals of magic. Doctor Strange, will we get him next week? Getting, as, they said, this Luke Skywalker moment, I never assumed it was Doctor Strange. But in that context, Luke Skywalker being Doctor Strange, putting on, having like a Yoda moment in reverse to, what we get of Empire Strikes Back, we might see Doctor Strange as Luke Skywalker taking in an apprentice, taking in a young Jedi, and Wanda and training her how to use her abilities because she is a myth, a legend, the Scarlet Witch. So can't wait to dive into it more tomorrow. Again, 3 p.m. Central Time tomorrow, Saturday, February 27th. Myself, Amanda, Chris, Paul from Heavy Spoilers, and Matthew from Soups will be breaking down this episode in its entirety. So I hope to see you all there tomorrow. And also, as you all can see on the screen now, I love me some watch parties, some watch along. So in some form or fashion, I will be doing a watch along for the series, or I should say the season finale of WandaVision, because we don't know, we might get a season 2 based on some recent comments by Kevin Feige. But I will be doing a watch along. So if you haven't already, follow me on Instagram, check the community tab here on YouTube. It'll either be Friday night, Saturday night, or Sunday sometime. So I will be doing a live watch along myself, some guests that I'm going to reach out to, some Avengers that I'm going to try to get on the panel to do a live watch along for the season finale of WandaVision episode 9 next week. So again, make sure you all, if you haven't already, to like this video, share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments. I love talking to you all about this show. Can't wait to talk about it tomorrow. But as always, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit the bell, that way you don't miss any of my other content. Hope you all are staying safe. Hope you all enjoyed this review, and we'll see you on the next video.